Breakdown, Glenn, we've got a breaking update right now. Donald Trump had taken the unprecedented step of suing the entire Maryland bench, the federal bench in Maryland. We now have an update on his effort to sue these judges. Can you explain what just happened?
Yeah, Brian, a Trump-appointed judge, Thomas Cullen, just threw out the entirety of Donald Trump and his DOJ's, lawsuit against all federal trial court judges in Maryland over, of all things, a 2-day pause, trying to give the federal judges in Maryland enough time to read the court filings, the petitions that undocumented immigrants filed when they were taken into detention by the Trump administration, in contemplation of deportation. Just a 2-day pause. You called it unprecedented. That's exactly what it is. Trump sued all federal judges in Maryland. Well, a Trump-appointed judge, Thomas Cullen, not only just threw out the lawsuit, he took Trump and Trump's executive branch officials, what I would call his flunkies, to task pretty directly. Let me just read our viewers a couple of sentences that Thomas Cullen wrote. He said, quote, "Over the past several months, principal officers of the executive and their spokespersons, in other words, Trump and his administration officials, his flunkies, have described federal district judges across the country as left-wing, liberal, activists, radical, politically minded, rogue, unhinged, outrageous, overzealous, and unconstitutional, crooked, and worse." The judge goes on to say this concerted effort by the executive, by Trump, to smear and impugn individual judges who rule against it is both unprecedented and unfortunate. Thomas Cullen pulled no punches. I would call him a point of light amidst the Trump-induced darkness. Now, we'll see if Trump and company try to appeal this, but I actually believe they won't, because it was such an outrageous move to sue all federal judges in a particular district because you don't like the fact that they wanted to have enough time to assess the claims that were being filed by undocumented immigrants asserting that they were being treated unlawfully and unconstitutionally.
Glenn, I know that I'm probably going to share the same concern that a lot of viewers who are watching right now are going to share, and that is this idea that how can Trump sue judges? Like, how does somebody have a basis to be able to even wage a lawsuit against a judge for doing their job of ruling against these? And there is recourse if Trump isn't happy with rulings, and you can appeal. That's built into the system. But to sue judges for judging feels like a complete bizarre thing to even be able to do in the first place.
It's a perfect question. How can he do it? Here's the answer. He can't. I mean,
Right.
He can file everything in court he wants to file, but judges have immunity. They can't be sued for carrying out their official duties, and that's exactly what Judge Cullen ruled. And as you say, Judge Cullen said, listen, there are other ways he could have attacked what was going on in these cases. For example, if, this 2-day pause created a hardship, for the Trump administration trying to deport a particular individual, which, Brian, we know it wouldn't create a hardship if they had to wait 2 days so the person they were trying to deport had their day in court. That's just what the Constitution provides. But if the Trump administration could prove that, well, then he could make that motion, and if it was denied, he could appeal it. What you can't do is bring lawsuits against judges for doing their jobs, particularly when their jobs are trying to prevent the Trump administration from violating the Constitution. But, Brian, we see over and over and over again the Trump administration and Donald Trump himself and his executive orders doing things that are unlawful and unconstitutional day after day after day. And he is defeated in court, including by judges he appointed to the bench. But here's the problem. There's no punishment for Donald Trump doing this.
Right.
He just moves on to the next unlawful and unconstitutional thing. The man is showing himself to be an illegitimate president. A president of the United States doesn't act unlawfully and unconstitutionally every day and just wait for the court to tell him so, when he's already moved on to 3 other unconstitutional things. This is not a legitimate president, and this is not sustainable the way he's governing, or I would call it the way he is trying to rule over who he perceives to be his subjects, we the people.
For anybody who's watching right now, one small step that you can all take to support our work is to subscribe to our channels. The links are in the post description of this video. Great way to support us, independent media more broadly, and it doesn't cost a thing to do so. Is there some concern, do you think, from Trump's perspective, that if he does try to appeal this to the appeals court, that this will create precedent, establish some precedent that would then be applicable to the rest of the country? And so if he wants to retain this tool in his arsenal of being able to just sue the entire bench, the entire federal bench in some specific jurisdiction, that he wants to kind of retain that ability to do so by not creating precedent in an unfavorable circumstance?
Brian, that would be a normal concern and calculation for legitimate DOJ lawyers and executive branch officials. I don't think he gives a rat's ass about creating bad precedent. The reason I say that, particularly in this setting, right, in the context of suing judges, it's because the precedent is already there. Judges have immunity against being sued for doing their damn job. So he didn't care about that. Why would he care about setting bad precedent in the appeals court if the appeals court upheld Judge Cullen's ruling that, no, you can't do it? So I just think all of the rules of convention are out the window with Trump.
Do you think that by virtue of waging this attack, and I kind of know what you're going to say in response to this question, but my question here is going to be, by virtue of waging this attack on the bench, doesn't this create an acrimonious relationship between the two? And I know that you're going to say that judges look at each case individually, in a vacuum, irrespective of what's happening outside of that case. But look, the reality is this does not create a good working relationship. There's no respect fostered between the two sides. And so does that have any downstream effect when you create this hostile relationship between two parties?
On the one hand, Brian, you already nailed what you knew my answer would be, which is that judges are supposed to saw the legal wood in front of them in each case, independent of and divorced from what might be going on in other cases. However, when you see Judge Cullen list that sort of string of near expletives that Trump and his flunkies have been hurling at the federal judges who have the nerve to rule against him, I think it's permeating. And I think the federal judges, when they're putting that kind of stuff in their legal opinions, that's unnecessary to include in there. However, I think that they are beginning to sort of come over to your view that, look, if we're going to have a runaway, corrupt, criminal, abusive executive and executive branch, we're going to have to start going harder, and we're going to take it into account, particularly when it comes to ever giving them the benefit of the doubt, or what we call the presumption of regularity, which most presidents enjoy. But Brian, most presidents actually have some concern about whether the executive orders they are signing are lawful and unconstitutional or not. But not this president. I think he actually relishes the idea that he's so powerful, he can issue unlawful and unconstitutional executive orders, and maybe he can squeak some by and get them up to the Supreme Court so those 6 right-wing justices may do his bidding up there. But I think you're right. I think this is so permeating the federal judiciary that they're going to be less and less and less inclined to ever give him the benefit of the doubt, to ever give him a presumption of regularity. And I think we're going to see more language like what Judge Cullen just put in to his ruling, throwing out Donald Trump's bullshit lawsuit against federal judges.
Glenn, you alluded to the fact that he does hope that he can get anything that he does up to the Supreme Court. Is there some concern that even with the district court judges, even with the appeals court judges, doesn't matter what jurisdiction, anywhere in the country, state or federal, that ultimately, so long as he knows he owns the U.S. Supreme Court, he's kind of got what he needs, because he can just, I mean, really those are just speed bumps en route to his eventual destination, which is the Supreme Court. And so is there some concern that he can go through kind of the process of getting in front of these judges at the district court level, appealing up to the appeals court, doesn't really matter at the end of the day as far as Trump is concerned, whether he gets a good ruling or not, because really what his focus is just getting this thing in front of his lackeys on the U.S. Supreme Court. Those are the only people that matter. Those are the only people that he knows are fully in his pocket. And so isn't all of this just some kind of futile exercise, knowing that at the end of the line, he's got what he needs?
It may be from Donald Trump's perspective, but I think with every ruling that comes out like this from the Judge Cullens of the federal judiciary, a Trump-appointed judge, I will say again, I actually think it permeates the public's consciousness. And, we the voters, as long as we have a free and fair election coming up in the midterms, we the voters have a little something to say about it. So from Trump's perspective, yes, if he can get anything up to his captured court, he is hopeful that they will rule his way, notwithstanding the express language of the Constitution, exactly as they did in the presidential immunity case. But the other thing, Brian, I am always wondering and perhaps hoping against hope that even the 6 justices who make up that kind of radical right wing of the Supreme Court, who are forever willing to do favors for Donald Trump, even they may say enough is enough, because if we continue to let him go down this path of unconstrained power, unconstrained by the law or the Constitution, then our democracy is at risk of falling, and we, the Supreme Court justices, are at risk of losing our job, our power, our position, our authority, because there's one thing that a dictator, Donald Trump is an aspiring dictator, there's one thing a dictator has absolutely no use for. It is a Supreme Court. Happy to have inferior courts, inferior to the executive branch, the king, the dictator, the autocrat. So there may come a time, maybe, when the Supreme Court, the right-wing bloc on the Supreme Court says, even for us, this is a bridge too far. We'll see.
Well, look, I think it's especially important for that reason, given the posture Trump has taken here, given the total control that he's seeking to have, that we have folks in the independent media space who continue to speak out about that. That's what we try to do on a daily basis. So highly recommend for anybody who's watching right now, if you'd like to elevate our voices, support our work, and support independent media more broadly, please subscribe to both of our channels. The links are right here on the screen. It's completely free to do so, but it's a great way to support our work. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.